so dedicated to equipping and inspiring people to accomplish what God has prepared them for. I'm Doug Piper, and I'm a halftime alumni, and these webinars are part of my halftime journey. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you'd like to work on creating more significance in your life, or maybe you know someone that's in that season, you can find out more by going to halftime.org. That is www.halftime.org. And I'll also include that information again at the end of the program. Today we have Lloyd Reeb, Bob Dahl, and Paul McGinnis to talk to us about using our platform during a crisis. Gentlemen, welcome today.
Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
I'll introduce everybody briefly. Bob Dahl is a senior portfolio manager and chief equity strategist at Nuveen. He is a highly respected authority in the equities markets with investors, advisors, and the media. Paul McGinnis is vice president of sales and marketing at VOMO. This stands for Volunteer Mobilization, and they're a tech startup with a volunteer engagement platform, which is focused on mobilizing volunteers and organizations reliant on volunteers. Lloyd Reeb is a successful real estate developer, author of 3 books, and the founding partner of Halftime Institute. Today, we're going to be sharing a very timely topic, using your platform for good during crisis. Lloyd, could you please provide some insight into today's program?
Thank you, Doug, and always a joy to partner together. Thank you for your friendship. Rodney Stark wrote a book called The Rise of Christianity. He's a sociologist. And he wrote about this question: how did a fledgling group of Christians on the outskirts of the Roman Empire displace classic paganism as the prominent faith of Western civilization in less than 100 years? And for many of us, we know that in part it was roads, common language, relative peace, maybe the currency. But in his research, he points to overwhelming evidence that in the year 260 or 262, there was a health pandemic that swept through the world, in particular the Roman world. At its peak, approximately 5,000 people a day were dying in Rome. And Christians did what was unthinkable. They cared for people outside their family. When those that were pagan would leave their family on the street and leave the city to avoid illness, Christians would bring them into their homes and care for them. Many of them died along the way. Even the emperor at the time complained in writing that the Christians were showing up, the pagans at the time, by caring for those around them that they didn't know, in creating things that today we would call hospitals. And the church grew from 6 million to 50 million in several generations. And the question is, how do you prepare to make your biggest contribution living out your calling in the darkest times? And I've been working on this since 2011 when I sat at the top of the Marina Bay Sands in Singapore. Their economy was growing at over 11% per year. There were 40 or 50 cranes building beautiful buildings. It was the second largest, busiest harbor in the world at the time. I sat with my friend Terry Knutson, who's a halftime alumni like you all, and he was traveling with me around the world doing halftime events, but he was looking for ways to give his money away. And I asked Terry, what do you know for sure as you look out over this city? And he said to me, it won't always be this way. And we asked the question of ourselves in 2011, how does a global thinking Christian prepare to live out their calling in the next global crisis? And that's what we want to explore today, because that crisis is on our doorstep. And we have the privilege, like early Christians, to be part of something that could really touch the hearts and souls of people around us. So perhaps your greatest impact is in this season of darkness in our countries and around the world. So we believe that halftime alumni are particularly well prepared to make a contribution, perhaps their biggest contribution in times of crisis, for 3 reasons. Number one, you've already been working on defining your calling, so you know where to plug in. Secondly, that you've been working on creating capacity. If if you and I don't have any capacity in terms of time, money, or energy to give away other than caring for our own family, we can't make a difference in this crisis. And then lastly, our hearts have already been turned outward. Your hearts are focused outward, not inward. And so your heart pains for the suffering that's sweeping across our countries. And so in this 30-minute webinar, Doug and I and Bob and Paul just want to share with you some of the things we've been learning. I would love for you to be able to look deep inside their world. Bob's coming from a corporate world. Paul's coming from a startup. Both are halftime alumni, just like you. They know their calling and they're trying to live it out. We don't have the answers, do we, Doug? We always say we're the platform, not the show. We've got bigger questions than we have answers, but we've been living into this. So, Doug, set up our call for the day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Lloyd. We're going to move into the main discussion momentarily, but there are a few quick logistical items I'd like to go through before we move into the main presentation. We do these webinars regularly, and our next one will be April 23rd, which is on exiting your first half career well. I'd encourage you to continue the conversation by asking questions and submitting them in the Ask a Question link that's at the bottom center of the screen. We also have a poll there, and we would love to hear your thoughts on the poll because we will kind of shape this conversation depending on what your answers are. So please put those in there. We'd also love you to chat in the chat screen that's on there. Please enter in where you're from. We would love to see you join in. The only thing I would ask is don't put questions there. The questions belong in the Ask a Question field, which we will move to in the second part of the webinar. Just quickly, if your webinar is not playing correctly or is freezing, and we certainly know that the internet is particularly stressed during these days, just refresh your browser window. That usually fixes it. If you're having audio issues, just double check your local audio that you're not muted or your speakers are not turned down. And everyone that's registered with an email will get a link with the recording, the resources, and the Facebook groups. So, gentlemen, appreciate everybody being here. And so I think what I'd love to do at this point is, Lloyd, could you maybe start with your thoughts on doing good in our platform?
Yeah, so there's two pieces to this question. How do you use your platform for good in a time of crisis? And Bob, you and I went on this journey together. When you went through halftime, I had a privilege to be a fly on the wall. And when I think of platform, I'm not sure what you think of it, but I think of a whole basket of things. Your brand as a person, your expertise, your team, your assets like real estate, your resources, your influence. And I know that you intentionally shaped your platform because you feel your calling is clearly to the global financial markets. I remember you pushing the pause button and with Leslie just saying, okay, Lord, what do you want us to do? And Leslie ended up with one thing that's fascinating, and you ended up with being called right back into these financial markets. So talk about that journey first, and then we'll talk about what does good look like in the global financial markets.
Certainly, Lloyd, you were much more than a fly on the wall. Lloyd was my coach and helped me see lots of things in new ways and able to reach beyond what I was seeing in my immediate future and tried to focus on the long term. So I'm eternally grateful for you, Lloyd, in that sense. I even brought along, to make you proud or embarrassed, my calling and mission statement that we worked on a decade ago.
Wow.
I think it will be a good thing to help launch our conversation. So, folks, here it is. I will, with God's help, maintain and enhance a global platform and voice through my ability to manage money and speak about financial markets so that I can use both money and a Christian worldview to impact and serve organizations and Christian business groups at the convergence of faith and work so as to enable ministry and increase commitment to Christian faith in life and work. Well, that's a run-on sentence in some ways, but it tries to pack a lot in. Let me just pick up on a piece and you can take me wherever you want to. Speak about financial markets. In these times, given coronavirus and all the upsetment and the bear market needless to say, part of my platform, Lloyd, is to talk about the markets. And I probably so far this week have spoken to about 40 groups all over the phone, in conference rooms, or more likely in living rooms and home offices, to talk about the markets. And that's been a whole lot of fun. But if you listen to the mission statement, the more interesting ones have been fewer. In fact, I just got another one this evening. Bob, would you speak next Thursday morning at the New Canaan Society meeting and talk about the markets for the Christians that are in the room? So this is taking, if you will, the platform, if I can say it this way, the secular platform, the calling God has given me, and take it in a ministry sense to brothers in the Lord.
Yeah, and so in that sentence is embedded your unique abilities that I simply don't have, and then you have to be diligent at that, and you have to continue to give it your very best in order to win the right to speak into the hearts and minds of not only Christians, but the total market on global finance. Now, let's talk about doing good in the global financial markets, because, in the day in Rome in 260, it meant walking out your front door, pulling somebody that was dirty and smelly and very sick into your home and trying to care for them. And that's not necessarily what your calling is. And it doesn't mean you and I couldn't grow into learning to do that kind of heart-on-heart care. And we don't know if we might be called to do that in the future. But for now, your role is more sterile, is to be a leader in the financial markets and to have that brand, to nurture that brand. Now, let's talk about good. So Jesus said to us, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the great commandment. And on the other end, go into all the world and preach the gospel and make disciples, the Great Commission. So these are the two directives that we've been given, all of us have been given, in terms of this phrase, doing good. Where do you see in the warp and woof of every day in the financial markets, where are some of the opportunities where you use this platform you've created to do these categories of good?
The first part, and you referred to it in your first comment after I read my mission statement, and that is, we're to be good at what it is that we do. That's foundational. Who wants to imitate our life if we're a C+ at work? I extend that and get theological and saying, no, wait a minute. God is a great worker. Last I looked out the window, it was pretty impressive. And we're made in his image, and therefore we're to do well. And if we do well at our main calling, others might want to look at the rest of our life. So that's the first thing in doing good, in my view.
And Bob, let me push the pause button there for a second, because you just talked about theology. And you remember early on in our journey together, you felt like your platform was outstripping your theology. And part of building this platform is you went back and you honed that, so that you've got a reason for the hope that is within you, and you've thought it through, and you've got it thought through now. You've honed the theology piece to back up the platform you have.
Yes, we're here's another theology piece. If somebody asks me about the stock market, I can go on for hours. And if somebody asks me about some theological issue and I only have a half a sentence to respond, what does that say about my priorities? What does it say about my faith? I have to have equal answers there. So that's a key part that we need to develop, which you do by obviously being in the Word, talking to others, reading good books, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all part of the journey. Where I was going to head next is bringing the platform and doing good. So just today, I got emails from 3 friends. Bob, in light of the current markets, would you please look at my financial position? And so I said, of course. And so they've emailed me scanned copies of their portfolios. So here's a great way for me to take the skill set that God has trained me in and be able to help my neighbor, help my brother to look and feel like they're going to be okay, or suggest a change somewhere along the line. Very practical examples. Others, last night when I went home, Leslie, my wife, said, so-and-so is dependent on being able to do concerts here and there, and they're all getting canceled. She's going to be hungry if we don't help. So here's another opportunity to materially help somebody. And the list goes on and on and on. We just need to be aware of our surroundings, be open, be sympathetic, be empathetic to people, because we're only in the early days of the mess that we're going to be in here for the next bunch of weeks. Staring at our four walls for a lot of people in 3-4 days has gotten old. Wait till it's 3-4 weeks.
Yeah. Well, and then I know that one of the things you do is you speak to Christians in the financial markets to encourage them to be bold in times. I remember Bob saying to me, I never muscle up with my faith with my friends, but when they ask, I never duck.
Yeah, I love that. I love that line. And as you and I were talking before, we're now in a period of time when people are just going to be a little more open. So whatever was normal before in someone's setting, I think we can go a half a step at least further, Lloyd, and I think you would agree, because people are asking questions either out loud or of themselves. They're wondering, what's this all about? Somebody said to me recently, the world's out of control. And I said, no. The world is very much in control. We are not controlling it, perhaps, the way we did a month ago, but it's very much in control. And there's someone called a being called God who is in control. What a wonderful theology moment.
So part of it is being prepared to give a reason for the hope we have. And I have a banker friend that took a risk this week and talked to his team about that very same thing and just said, here are the big things we need to be focused on. But let me tell you, at a heart level, I always fall back at times like this. I fall back on my faith. And how can I encourage you to fall back on something that's really rock solid? And that's courageous. And it's one thing to be courageous if you're a business owner like my partner and I, where nobody can fire us. We're caring for seniors in our retirement homes, and we can tell them, hey, we're praying for you every day. And we can honestly have open, deep conversations with them. It's another thing in the position where you are and so many others in corporate America. So
to interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
What comes to mind is, so as some of you know, I'm on financial television fairly regularly, and in periods of turmoil a little more often. CNBC, for example, is, Bob, when things go haywire, you're one of the first people we come to because you have this calming influence. And at one point when they said that, I said to the producer, do you want to know why I have that calming influence? And I told them why. I realized, first of all, it's not our money, it's God's money, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, that's all interesting, but please don't say that on the air.
That's good. Well, Doug, before we turn to Paul's story, do you want to take a minute and take us through the poll that our colleagues have?
So, and those of you that have not commented yet on the poll, we would ask you to please do that. Our question is, as we enter this crisis, what is your biggest concern? And we want you to choose one answer. And Lloyd, it is by far almost 80% the medical and financial impact on my friends and my family. The second question we have asked is a little more spread out, but it's really down to two answers for the most part. When you think about how you could get to or how you're using your platform for good in this crisis, which do you think is the most likely? The two highest questions at 40% each is providing expertise and personal care, i.e. encouragement. So, Lloyd, how do those answers, are you surprised at those?
Well, I understand that our families' needs are top of mind with us. But you and I are leading our families to be world Christian global citizens. And these are times when we can really model for them that this is not about us and that we've been incredibly ambushed by God's goodness. And how can we as a family show up and make a difference? Shanna, our daughter-in-law, runs a ministry called Davidson Village Network. They care for seniors in Davidson, North Carolina, that are poor and isolated. Well, they can no longer send volunteers into their home. And so she is busy working on ways to serve and undergird seniors that are the most vulnerable, both in terms of isolation, being able to get food, and also this illness. So, for me, it means showing up yesterday to spend 2 or 3 hours watching Lindley, which, by the way, is not a hardship, our little first grandbaby, Bob. And by the way, did I show you a picture of her yet? And, that's so that she can be living out what she's called to do, to be a part of this crisis. So I would encourage all of us to take our families, circle the wagons, and say, hey, this is an opportunity, just like the early church, for us to show up, and God will protect us and he'll provide for us. Now, so the interesting thing then, and Paul, I want to turn to you on this, is the two big areas where we feel like we have the opportunities are expertise and personal care. And you've honed your expertise as a world-class marketer, as the CMO for Ecolabs. And so you've worked in big corporate and came through Halftime, and now you're in a startup that's just uniquely positioned to be able to do something at a time like this. So take us back through your journey and what you've been working on 15 hours a day for the last 6 days.
Thanks, Lloyd. Yeah, during my halftime season, like most people on the call right now, I worked with my coach on crafting my second half mission statement. And it was, simply put, it was to come alongside potential world changers with my gifts and passion. And my gifts and passion around coaching and around communication, facilitation, but also around servant leadership. And I've never considered myself a marketing expert, but I do love mobilizing people around something and accomplishing a lot. And so in November of 2019, I moved to a tech startup called VOMO, which stands for Volunteer Mobilization, as Doug said. And never been there. You want to be in a Fortune 250 company, and it takes months to get stuff done. A startup, we can make $100,000 decisions in about 5 minutes. And I talk about pivots. And for you that are on the line on the webinar that have been entrepreneurs, this is new for me, of pivoting literally every day, I think. And in the last 6 days, it's been pivoting probably every 30 minutes. And so what we did is had a huge pivot 6 days ago on Friday. And it reminded me, Lloyd, of, I don't remember exactly how Bob said it, but it was something about avoid the failure of the imagination. And it was one of those moments we said, how should we respond? How should we respond in this crisis? So we have a tech platform that we've built over the last 3 years that tries to engage a community, a local community, whether that's a church, a nonprofit, a school, a city, anybody that has volunteers, engage them with volunteers through a tech platform that is radically simple, so that needs can be taken care of in a very quick way, a timely way, and impactful way. And so we decided to make a pivot and offer up our platform for free and for access to everyone across the United States, for people to do two things. One is for volunteer organizations that have significant needs to post those needs on the platform, and for volunteers that we get calls every day saying, I am willing and healthy and willing to volunteer. Where do I go? What do I do? And there's really no national database of volunteers or anything to do that. We all have different things and ways to do that. So we've been working 24/7 for 6 days to be able to do that. And it fits perfectly in what God has called me to do in this season of my life, is to mobilize people. And so I've been working really hard at mobilizing our team internally, because literally every day we have a meeting and they're saying, what do I do today? What is my priority? And it changes every single day. And right now it's starting to work, and we hope it continues to work.
So, and because you spend part of your time coaching people through Halftime, this is the creative piece, isn't it? How do you adapt your platform to the urgency of a crisis like this? And Bob, when he would say, avoid the failure of the imagination, his point was that sometimes you and I get stuck in a rut, that this is all we could do, and we need other people, we need other stories to help us get in a different track, Mm-hmm. So what did you guys do to try to break free from how you were envisioning using your technology to this kind of completely different, trajectory?
I'd have to blame a bunch of entrepreneurs. To be honest with you, we partner with an organization in DC called Builders and Backers, and they are just a think tank of entrepreneurs and investors and philanthropists that really are all about entrepreneurial ingenuity. And so when you get some people like that are used to thinking creatively and thinking quickly and those kind of things, and they have no really idea of what you do, they just kind of hear the problem, hear the platform you have, and then the ideas just start flowing. And we just had like a day-long session with whiteboards filling up everywhere. And it was overwhelming and exciting all at the same time. And then say, all right, how can we do that? And that's where my skills come in, is what you said about adapting, is I can think strategically about what's going to happen, but then I can quickly go, okay, how do we execute this? How do we get teams very clear on their expectations and their roles very quickly, and make sure it's effective and efficient, because there are needs piling up. I mean, right now it's food banks, it's blood banks, and schools are the main ones. But as you guys all know, there are an enormous amount of needs that are coming in 6 days and 7 days and 9 days. And what we're trying to do is gear up in order to serve. And that's what we hope to do.
So, listening to you, Paul, and to Bob, here are kind of three things that I'm hearing from your journeys. One is that, obviously you've both cared for the needs of your own family. I mean, Bob, before we went live, you were talking about your daughter who's serving on the front lines as a nurse and wanting to come home, but doesn't want to infect you because you are elderly.
Thanks, Lloyd.
According to the Wall Street Journal, you are elderly. I just want you to know that. Like, my kids have been reminding me of that. And then, so afterwards, after I've done that, then I can ask myself, how can I use my expertise, my buildings, my technology, my resources, my unique personality, and my influence and my voice to respond to help people in needs of crisis, in this crisis? And then secondly, the thing I hear is, how can we deliver that to them without jeopardizing our own physical wellness and financial health? And then third, where does God want me to be very bold in sharing with my team and with those I serve the message of his goodness and grace and forgiveness in a humble way? And that takes creativity. So, Monday night I had 10 halftime alumni together on Zoom like this, that all have big national real estate platforms. And we brainstormed about how that could work. And it's so funny because when I talked to some of them ahead of time, these are all 10 guys that I had the privilege of coaching through their halftime journey, some of them 15 years ago. And they were thinking, well, how could I use my, big box distribution center that's dried in but not occupied yet? Or how can I use Kimmons Wilson is part of the Halftime family, and his father started the Holiday Inn franchise chain. And they have hotels all over the place that are completely empty. I mean, zero revenue. And so someone came up with the idea, how do we use those hotel rooms for people coming out of ICU eventually? And what happens is, if you get together with your other alumni in your industry or in your city or in your fellows cohort group, and we can coordinate that for you. Joel Hackney and I, he runs something called nThrive. He and I are going to coordinate a group of people that are involved with hospitals. And then there are car dealers around this country that can make a difference. And so what we're asking you to do is, if you've been through halftime and you're in an industry where you want to really seriously do this, just email me and we will try to connect you with groups of other people that are in the same space. So Doug, I'm going to wrap up since your mic is a little bit scratchy there. I want to finish this last little piece before we go to the Q&A piece, because our commitment is to end exactly at 9:00 Eastern. And this is where I wanted to end with is a quote from Randy Alcorn in his book Heaven. If you haven't read Randy Alcorn's book Heaven, these days of our leadership are equipping us for heaven. This is not a dry run. This is not a dress rehearsal anymore. These are days that not only try men's hearts, but that will shape you and I in terms of our leadership in the life to come in heaven. And Randy Alcorn says this, that through our creative industry as God's sub-creators, we should together make the invisible God visible. I mean, we are fighting an invisible enemy, and you and I get to represent the invisible God and make him visible. And he goes on to say, thus glorifying him in the sight of all creation. Through our creative industry as God's sub-creators, we should together make the invisible God visible and thus glorify him in the sight of all creation. So, Bob and Paul, if you can stick around for a few minutes, we'll tackle some of these questions. And if they're tough ones, Doug, let's give them to Bob. If they're real like softballs, give them to me. And then in between, give them to Paul.
Okay. Lloyd, you'll have to tell me whether my mic's clear enough to hear the questions. So if the first one doesn't go well, we may have to get somebody else to pick the ball up and run with it. By the way, everybody can ask a question. And if you look in the questions, you don't have one, you can vote up a question. Everybody gets one vote. And so that way it will prioritize and we'll get to the most important questions first. So I will read the question, and Lloyd, why don't you pick who's the best person to answer?
Okay, I will.
Oh, somebody's time in the barrel. So our first question is, the opportunities to serve during this time of crisis will be overwhelming. How can you begin to sift through all of them to find the priceless serving opportunities?
Yeah, so Paul, that's, you've had so many years coaching people that are trying to do this creative matching. So what would you say?
Wow. Say that again real quick so I get it right, Doug.
All right. The opportunities to serve during this time of crisis will be overwhelming. How will you begin to sift through all of them to find the priceless serving opportunities?
Yeah, I think how I think about that is we have to be careful, especially with what the poll said, is obviously our number one concern is care for our family. And I get that, and I care for my family. But I think more than ever, it's about obedience in this time. And for us to be the hands and feet of Jesus is not only, as Lloyd said, internally, it's also externally, and to be a visible difference. And I think because it's overwhelming, I think it starts small and it goes out locally. So for me, it's the building that we live in downtown Dallas. And then it's the area that we live in, which is the farmers market of Dallas. It's through our community right around us. I think that's how we're going to get through this, is locally. That's one of the reasons we opened up our platform, and we call it Be a Neighbor campaign and all this stuff, is to be able to geolocate opportunities that are within your locale to make an impact, because it is overwhelming when you look, and we hear it every day, of all these different opportunities all over the nation. Can we narrow it down on our platform to those that are in with a 10-mile radius of where you are? And we're not there yet because a lot of opportunities haven't come on our platform yet, but that's what we're trying to get. So I would just say the ones that are priceless are right in the community around you, literally within walking distance or driving distance.
That is a great answer. And Lloyd, was that clear enough? Can I continue, or should someone else read the question?
Yep. Nope, go for it.
Okay. Well, this isn't a question, but Don says hi from Chicago. Our next question is from Anthony. Anthony asks, how to give to others when the crisis has crippled you, your family, and everything you do, not knowing how long the crisis will actually last.
Yeah, my guess is that's Anthony from Manila, from the Philippines, Pagliano, and I can only imagine what's sweeping through his city. So, Bob, what are your thoughts on Anthony's question?
Yeah, I think that that is a tough one. Of course, there are all kinds of things we can give. Time, a shoulder to cry on. Yes, money, but interpretation I have of the premise of the question is, I don't have anything to give. Oh, yes, you do. Your empathy, your sympathy. I think part of what we're going to be able to give in these days to each other, particularly if things have been stripped away from us, is just being with other people. The isolation that we all face is difficult, period. But when needs rise, boy, we need other people. So I think coming together as a community, even if it is, across a phone line or a video conference like we're doing now.
Excellent. All right, Anthony, great question, and I'm sorry for what you must be going through. Our next question comes from Robert. I'm sorry I was a little late, so if you've answered this, please skip it. How, when you're helping, do you explicitly share the gospel?
So, Bob, how do you do that?
It depends on the situation. Sometimes it's easy to be very explicit. Sometimes it's just a note that follows in the name of the Lord, often leads to question marks. Sometimes what I'll do is if I'm helping somebody on something, I just end with, I'll be praying for you about this. And they kind of look at you, and that just creates an opening to talk. So you got to be situation specific and situation sensitive.
And you and I are building deep, lasting relationships as we serve people, and the door will open in. So one thing that I think is important is to learn how to ask good questions. And
better than anybody.
If one of the things that I like to ask is, man, in a time like this, suppose you were on the phone and you were on the phone with God, and somehow you knew it was God, and he said he would answer one question. What would you ask him? And I'll tell you that that is a way to get to a deep conversation without someone feeling like you're trying to pitch them something, but that you actually just come alongside them. The gospel is about coming beside people and loving them unconditionally. And then it's one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. Everybody in this world today is looking for bread. You and I have found it. And Jesus said, I would give you this living water and you'll never thirst again. So if you can learn to ask a few good questions, that is the biggest skill. I spent 5 years as a pastor of evangelism, and I did seeker small groups where we would have 6 or 8 people in a group for 6 weeks. And the only restriction to getting in was you had to not be a Christian and you had to have tough questions. And that is a joy to be on the journey, as long as you don't feel like you're an expert and you're going to try to convince somebody. But if you love them and you go on the journey and serve them and ask good questions.
Yeah, Lord, I can't remember who said it, but it was, preach all the time, and if you have to, use words. Whoever said that, I think that's really appropriate during this time. When we just give of ourselves, whether it's giving just hope, encouragement, or whatever it is, they're going to see Christ through us. And so it, like Bob said, when he said, that cameraman or whoever it was that said, why are you so calm? Just even if he didn't have the opportunity to go into great theological detail, which it didn't sound you didn't, they know something's different. And when they see us serving in this time, in a responsible way and with a smile on our face, that's going to mean the most.
What a great question, Robert. We'll move on to our next one, and this one's been highly voted up. It is the most popular question by far. So this comes from Larry, and Larry asks, what does boldness look like in the markets at this point, in a time for Christ followers? In your opinion, Bob, so I guess this one is pointed to you. I'll repeat it again. What does boldness look like in the markets at this time for Christ followers?
I just start by saying, I think we're in an environment where people are just going to be more open. I kind of referenced this before. In times of unusual sacrifice and times of unusual crisis, people eventually get to the point where it's not just putting one foot in front of the other. They stop and reflect. They ask the tough questions. They're bewildered. And that creates the opportunity to just be a little bolder than you otherwise might. Sometimes it's Instead of, I'll be praying for you, it's, can I pray for you right now? And you do it in their presence. Just be open to the Lord's leaning, to the Spirit's leading when it comes to interacting with people. People are hungry. People are searching. And the deepest need we all have, of course, is Jesus. And I think the environment today is going to cause that desire to dig deeper inside people's hearts in a way that we don't normally see. And people will be more open to listening to your prompting and your answer.
And I think also, Bob, in the back of your mind, to really come to grips with the fact that you're not trying to use a crisis situation as a way to manipulate people into your faith. That's just ridiculous. But if you love somebody and you're serving them and they have a deep spiritual need in their heart, and you have found solace in the relationship with the God who designed this universe and is in control, why wouldn't we want to share that? Even if we just said, well, I find deep comfort in these times in my relationship with God. Where do you find comfort? And how can I help you with that?
And people, repeat, are just going to be so much more open to that conversation than they normally would be in the ordinary warp and woof of life. And it's a great time for the kingdom and for the spread of the gospel.
Yeah, it makes me think of what you said, Lloyd. When I left Ecolab, I left in prime earning years. I was 40 years old. It made no financial sense whatsoever, but it was the obedient thing to do. And my boss, who wasn't a believer, when I told him my story and why I was leaving, he said, "Why would your God tell you to do something so stupid?" And I just said, "Scott, he's always been faithful in the past, and I can only trust that he's going to be faithful in the future." And that has stuck with him a long time. And it was just that moment that we have to show that trust. And so, like Bob said, people are more malleable right now than ever before. And so just to be sensitive and walk in the Spirit and say, God, I don't know what I'm going to say and what I'm going to do. Just go before me and give me the words.
Now, you could have told him that, you know what, you're going to work for the next 10 years. Your stock at Ecolab is going to go all the way up. But in 2020, it's going to come right back to this same place. So I'm just going to skip all that work and I'll buy back in.
That's right.
Okay, enough fooling around. Doug, we got to get through these questions in a few minutes here.
We do. But get yours in. That was a very popular question. Our next one is from Jay. And Jay asks, could you discuss local versus global? Some are called and have a platform with those close in, such as family, friends, business associates, and contacts. Others may be called to a more broad or global way. Any thoughts on how to glean where my call is? Speaking of as an individual, how do I decide whether mine is global or local?
Yeah, well, as if you're a halftime alumni, we always, one of the questions we always ask is your mission or calling is made up of three things: your strengths, your passion, and the difference you want to make in the world. And so, Jesus had a mission statement. He described, I am come so that, and he described his purpose in a single sentence. And then he had a strategy to execute on it. He said, he set his face as a flint to go to Jerusalem. In other words, he was eliminating options, and he had a strategy to execute on his calling. Now, at the same time, we see him every day getting up in the morning, early before dawn, and going on his knees and asking for wisdom from his Father. We see him responding spontaneously to a lady who yanked on his jacket and needed help right then. And so there's a certain sense that if Jesus could live with having a very clear mission statement and a strategy to execute on it, and a daily dependence on the Spirit of God and willingness to be compassionate with someone who yanked on his jacket, then can I live with this tension? So one seemed local and the other seemed obviously global. It's changed the whole face of human history. So I would ask the question, what is my overarching calling? And then each day, how can I respond compassionately to the needs of people around me? And if you're not clear on your calling, then there's a process for that. But part of that process, I remember, hundreds of times I've looked someone in the eye and said, okay, this is your mission statement. Now, you can execute on that locally, nationally, or internationally. Which would you prefer? And I think God gives us so much freedom. He's working all around the world. And so he gives us so much freedom to execute on our calling in different settings. And so this is part of taking time in this time of crisis, particularly just before the wave hits us, to get on our knees and ask the Lord, okay, how do you want me to respond spontaneously to the needs you bring to me every day? How can I have the financial resources so that I haven't spent the money on myself? How can I have the cash available to make a difference? How can I have the time available to make a difference? And then how do you want me to use this bigger platform, this maybe national or this global platform that you have? And so, for example, I'm leading a halftime roundtable group in Monaco. They meet at noon every other week. It's 6 o'clock my time. That's part of my global platform. I believe that halftime can be a huge impact in the city-state of Monaco. But meanwhile, tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I have a roundtable right here in Charlotte that I'm leading with two other buddies, and it'll be on Zoom. And so you may end up with a portfolio of compassionate stuff right nearby and something that looks bigger or more scaled. You know, the thing that you want to watch out for is thinking that something that has scale is a bigger calling. One of the guys that came through halftime 3 or 4 years ago, he thought his calling was around teaching financial literacy to disadvantaged children. He built something called Chump Change. And then 3 years ago, his 55-year-old wife was diagnosed with early onset dementia. And he has spent the last 3 years caring for her. And there's no bigger calling than caring for your wife if she has an illness or dementia. So this is the personal part of calling. It's about making eye contact with God, getting your unique assignment from him. But I can tell you, sitting here every day and having worked on preparing to be available to serve in a time of crisis, I know this is my calling. And it is so freeing that while our business is going along and family stuff's happening, that I have the freedom to focus here for the biggest part of my day, because I'm really confident I was put here for this purpose and equipped over the last 20 years to do this. And there's so much joy and peace in that.
Well, great question, but an even better answer. Thank you, Lloyd.
Yeah.
We will move on to the next one. The next question comes from Mike. And Mike asks, how do I help the CEO I'm coaching and consulting with scale an internationally focused organization to meet local needs domestically and need to leverage volunteers?
Yeah, Bob, that's a good one for you since you work with those guys a lot.
Yeah, it's as Lloyd said so eloquently a couple questions ago, it's not either or, it's and, or it's both. And God calls us at different points of time in different directions. And part of this is empowering and leading people. Many of us have the opportunity to do that. And there are obvious people who are going to be big and broad geographically. And there are others that are gifted on one-on-one settings and need to go about the local. So I think the dilemma there is really an opportunity to do both and find the right people to speak to both simultaneously.
All right. We will move. We have, looks like 8 more questions. And we promise we will end pretty close to the top of the hour. This next one's from Wilson. And Wilson asks, as a retired educator, please give me some ideas on how to impact my community.
Lloyd, what comes to mind, one of the things that we're seeing pop up, a lot of nonprofits and churches and organizations that deal with volunteers are just trying to figure out what to do. I mean, not only are we going to have a service next week, or, how are we going to do it? Like food banks, they used to have hundreds of people in the distribution center, and now they can't because of social distancing. So how do they do it? One of the things we're seeing pop up a lot is teleteaching. And so as a retired educator, there are opportunities that are coming up where you can teach. My wife is a school teacher, and they're going through that right now, figuring out how are they going to do that. So teleteaching is one that jumps out to my mind that I've seen come up in various locales across the country.
That's good. Any thoughts, Bob?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The needs are immense, and somebody who's retired from a profession is going to have all kinds of wonderful things to offer, and probably more time than the average person. So, whether it's your church or some parachurch organization, raise your hand and say, "Hey, I want to help." My guess is they'll give you a very long list.
Yeah.
All right, we will move on through these questions. We've got 7 more. Thank you, Wilson. Our next one is from Phil. He says, we offer internet broadband service in rural markets. We want to keep people connected in this time of need. How do you decide on offering services complementary, i.e. being charitable, but also keeping the financials viable and being a good steward to my investors?
Yeah, that's a really good, thought-provoking, sophisticated question. So, Bob, what are your first thoughts?
Yeah, my first thoughts are I'm always this way, even about attending a conference. Don't give it to people necessarily for free. Let them have some skin in the game. Yeah, you can have it a low cost option. So I think there's a nice in between where you can try. I know I'm trying to split the baby here. Where you can satisfy both of your objectives. You want to serve people and you want to provide your investors for the return for the investment they've made. I don't know if that fits in your situation, but that's generally the route I try to advise people or myself take, a little bit of both.
Now, so a good example, I think, maybe, Bob, of this is one of the guys I think on our call is a young 40-year-old entrepreneur that I have had the privilege of going on this journey with, that I care deeply about. And his name is Micah. He's a real estate developer. He owns shopping centers, but he also owns a bunch of hotels in Nashville. And Nashville was hit by 2 things recently. One was a hurricane. And surprisingly, all of his hotels were fine, but within a 9-iron shot, there's devastation. And then he had them filled for the NCAA tournament last weekend, and it was canceled. And so it's empty, empty. And so he's got several audiences. He's got a team of people around him that are his employees, and they're looking at him like, okay, Micah, who are you when the chips are down? So that's the first audience, is how do you live your faith out just to your team? And they're getting calls all day long from people saying, I want my money back. What do you tell them to say? And so we talked this through, because it's the same kind of question of, you got to be financially responsible. In Micah's case, his hotels, he gives the profits away. If you go and stay in his hotel in Nashville, the profits go to fund a homeless person to have a free night of stay and a shower and a meal. So he has already created financial margin by seconding the cash off to the side, the profits off to the side. But even beyond that, he came up with a series of questions for his team to ask, to divide between compassion and mercy. And there are people calling in saying, well, that who were going to pay $300 for an NCAA ticket. And frankly, losing one night's hotel is not a burden to them. And so I think he landed on giving them a coupon to come back another time. There's an 80-year-old lady calling in, and she's coming to visit her 82-year-old sister. And because they're both in a high risk zone for this virus, she can't come. Well, that hotel is a big deal to her. And so he decided to just tell the team, please give her money back. And then he came up with another really innovative idea, and that is these people who just had their homes destroyed with the hurricane, they can stay in my hotel for free. Look, they're going to be empty anyway. So let's just give them a place where they can stay. And I just think that's so remarkable for a 40-year-old guy to have that kind of maturity and to lean into trusting God. And I can't imagine what his team is thinking as they look over his shoulder and hear his heart and hear his voice as he shapes turns their values into action.
Brilliant.
Living the gospel right there.
So, Mike, if you're on the call, I really applaud you, buddy. I love you.
All right, we will move on to our next question. This one is from Bobby. Bobby asks, what are some of the best organizations to support those that are helping in the need on the street, jobless, or at risk for coronavirus. I'll read that again. What are some of the best organizations to support those that in need on the streets that are jobless or at risk for coronavirus?
Yeah, so I have no technical expertise on that. Do you, Paul, have some insights on that yet?
That's a tough question just because I think we all have different opinions on where to put your money. I would encourage you to look locally at who is truly making a difference in this pandemic-related environment. For us in Dallas, United Way is doing phenomenal work here. The North Texas Food Bank, Salvation Army. So locally, and that may be different in different locales across the country. But I would say, do a little bit of due diligence, see what they're doing, look at their website and see what they're focused on and how they're responding. And just say, God, this isn't your money, and I'm going to do my best to figure it out. But what I've seen so far in Dallas and some of the other areas we've been working with, the good is coming out. And so I'm not near as concerned about that, but it's a good question. I would just say, just be cautious, but also just be willing to look and see what they're doing.
And this is really a little bit bigger question because, those of us who've been, like I said, ambushed by God's goodness, we need to build the muscle of being good kingdom investors. And Bob, you and Leslie work on that. Leslie has an MBA in international business, and she spends her time giving your money away. And you're like on a little gerbil thing out there making money, and you shovel it in the front door and she shovels it out the back. So you're just going around and around every day, and she's just making all the smart decisions. How do you, what are some of the ground rules, in a soundbite?
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. I'll be sure to relay that to her. It feels like a gerbil some days. We sit down regularly and look at where our money's going. We were Thanksgiving of last year invited to serve a meal at a rescue mission in Philadelphia. We did. And around that time, I'd been in my devotions studying how Jesus served the poor. And this all intersected to say, my goodness, we have not given to the poor in spirit, poor materially, the way Jesus did. So we significantly increased the percentage of our giving to that sort of thing. So there's a practical way that God impacted us. At that very mission, here's my wife. We took a tour and we saw the dilapidated bathrooms, and they said they were working on a project to fix it. And Leslie asked, well, how much would that cost? We got the number. And I said, why don't we pay for the feasibility study? She said, why don't we pay for the whole thing? You can imagine what we did.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So we can't go too deep into that. But we do have a tool that if you email, I'll be glad to send you about building a family giving strategy. And, and it's got 6 key questions and some case studies, but we have a family giving plan, and the kids all have a certain amount they can give. They do give from it, and they go back and forth. And our goal in the family is to teach them to be better givers than we are, so that we don't have to worry about restrictions when we pass away. Instead, we know they're going to be better stewards of the money than we are. So this is a great time to get your family involved and build a strategic giving plan for your family.
Gentlemen, it's the top of the hour, and we have still, it looks like, about 5 more questions. If it's okay with you, what I'd like to do is thank those that have only allocated an hour. And then if you can continue with the questions, we'll continue on for a few minutes. Is that work for everybody?
Yes.
All right. So for those of you that have only allocated an hour, we really appreciate your time so much. We do these every month, and the next one that's planned is April 23rd, and we look forward to having you then. For those of you that can stay, we would appreciate you staying to hear the rest of the Q&A. If there's time to take more questions, we will take those. And just know, if you need to ask a question and then run, please know you'll actually get an email with your answer that as it was recorded in our session. So for those that need to leave, bye. We thank you for your time. For those that want to stay, we're not going anywhere, and we'll continue on with these great questions.
So, Doug, if you look in the chat thing there, Linda Reeb says, so encouraging, yada, yada, yada. Hear from you guys? Did you see that? I would have thought she would have said, who's that hot guy with the silver hair and the blue shirt?
Doug? Doug?
Oh, yeah, Doug.
Or the one with the bad mic. All right. The next one comes from Mike. How do I help the CEO I'm coaching and consulting with scale? Or how do I help a CEO I'm coaching and consulting with scaling an internationally focused organization to meet local needs domestically? The need to leverage volunteers.
I think we answered that, Doug, early on. Yeah.
We will move on. Just a couple more then. Next one is from Josh. In a crisis situations like this, when news and guidelines are constantly changing the business environment so quickly, how do you lead your company, plan ahead with wisdom, take care of your people, and balance the other roles in your life? This comes from Josh.
Yeah. Bob?
Yeah, with great difficulty. It is one of those times, and I'm watching leaders, and some of them are doing it really well, and others are struggling. Those that are doing it well, I think, are communicating often. They're talking very practically about why it is they're making the decisions they are, and acknowledging the situation might change in the next 48 hours. Stay tuned. Others are kind of spinning their wheels, not necessarily leading and kind of letting the environment envelop them. So be bold, be decisive, listen to the people around you who are part of your staff, and then make decisions, but explain why you've decided, but be flexible.
You know, on that same note, Doug, we've had some creativity around that when we had people saying, hey, you're encouraging volunteering, but at the same time, is that going against the CDC guidelines? And that is a really difficult balance. And so we've posted things on our website, the BeAneighborCampaign.com, to say, how do you responsibly volunteer and those things? But we also reached out to our partners as a business. And one of our background check partners said, we want to help. And they got together with their executive board and our executives, and hopefully soon in the next 2 days, we're going to be offering background checks to those that volunteer through our platform, so that when they go and volunteer somewhere else, there's been some kind of vetting process. Now, again, that's different from pandemic-related vetting, obviously, but those are the kind of things I think leaders need to think through, is how can we reach out to partners, and how can we get the creative juices flowing on how this can happen?
All right, boy, this is a lot of really good questions. Last two, it looks like. This one comes from Mike. First gentleman, thank you for getting the creative juices flowing. How do I think tactically to address the needs now and yet think ahead about how we help further out? So I guess he's really saying, how do we tactically address what's immediate, but also keep in mind future needs?
Yeah. Bob?
Yeah, I think that's part of good leadership. You need to break the decision process into bite-sized pieces. So in my leadership, I try to do those very things. What are the things that we need to do now that are going to benefit our organization, benefit our portfolios, and then separately address the other? But then we bring the two together to make sure one's not contradicting the other, because there are different ways, given time frames are different, to approach situations. So I think you have to do both, but make sure they're not at odds with one another at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's interesting, because of all people, you have those two converging. It's minute by minute now in the trades, and then there's this longer term, like that's really fascinating that you're living with that every day.
You're here.
All right, we'll get down to our last couple of questions. The next one comes from Jay. This is a great session, and there's a lot of great folks here. how can we as a group best connect with Halftime and stay engaged so we can encourage each other?
Yeah, it would be, if you would like to connect with a other group of alumni in your industry, just email me at lloyd.reeb@halftime.org. And then if you haven't been through Halftime and you're not sure of your calling, then let us help you. We can do that remotely. You don't have to be together. We have virtual cohorts meeting now. And this virus hasn't really slowed down our ability to serve people. It's slowed down our ability to get people together in the same room. But I'm spending every day serving people. And like I said, tomorrow morning, have a round table of people at 8:00. So if you don't have clarity, it's hard to know how to focus, and we can help you with the clarity. If you have clarity and you're in your platform and you want to connect with others, we'll do that for you as well.
All right. And our next one comes from Lee. Lee asks, have you ever said to someone who offered you a helping hand, some gift of support or encouragement, gentle friend, you are a purple cloth dealer, you guys, I think we'll skip that one. All right.
Well,
our next one. As Christian leaders, what is your personal view and reflection why this pandemic is happening to all of us? Is there a much deeper meaning that God is telling us to do?
Either of you have a thought on that?
I'll start. This comes in the category of things God permits. He could have wiped out this virus, but he chose not to. And I think he's probably saying, I wonder how my people are going to react. I wonder what's going to happen with my kingdom on this planet. I think we all know or can testify that in valleys and in difficult circumstances, we often rely more on the Lord than we do when things are going well and we're going 100 miles an hour. So his permitting this, I think, will bring a lot of us closer to God and hopefully cause a lot of people who don't know him to ask the question. So as I said earlier, I think it's a great time for the gospel.
Yeah, I think about the sigmoid curve that we all know as halftimers. And like Bob just said, God does his best work. Life between the curves is highly emotional. But that's where, if you look back at your spiritual milestones, that's where most of them come from, because it brings us to our knees. And the older I get, I find that God wants to reconcile and redeem his creation to himself. And he'll go about any way doing that and turns anything into good. That's what he says, right? That all things work together for good for those that love the Lord. And so this is one of those moments that I think, like Bob said, it can be a time of great revival in our country and around the world.
All right. Thank you, Alan. That was a good one. Our next one, let's see. I'm trying to answer the question. This comes from McGimby, and they say they mentor, equip, and empower youths in leadership and entrepreneurship, and went on to start a food enterprise and have employed 8 youths. As of yesterday, she had to close her juice bar, and she has no innovative idea as to how to do fruit delivery system. There's an urgent need to build a positive room. Who can help? And I would guess that is, just how could she be encouraged? Is there someone she can reach out to as I would read that?
Yeah, so, one of the things you want to look for is complementary talents around you, wherever you are. It's always better to work in a team than alone. And there are smart business people who are used to doing consulting and business plans in almost every city that'll help with nonprofits. In Dallas, for example, there's a guy named Jim Beckett that created something called Shine, SHINE. And every Thursday they have a different nonprofit in, and he gets 5 or 6 businessmen and women there, and they take their business plan apart and help them fix the biggest problems they have. So there are consulting firms like that and groups of people that you just have to smoke them out. But the big thing is when you go on a journey in your second half to know what my core competency is and what it's not, and don't try to do the things you're not good at. Like, I don't know technology, Doug does. And so we stick with that. And I don't know the financial markets, Bob does. And I don't know marketing, Paul does. So I can do one small thing, I'm going to stick with it. And you always need people around you. It's part of your tribe. So part of what we teach people in the Halftime Institute is how to build your tribe so that you have the talent you need around you to be successful over the long haul. So, Doug, we probably should wrap up there since we're kind of pushing the time limits on Paul and Bob, and we committed to an hour with them. And this was a joy. You guys really, I just love your hearts in serving our fellow halftimers.
Lloyd, is you or anybody want to make a closing comment as we wrap up?
Bob, why don't you wrap us up?
Yeah, I have several things to say. If you give me the floor, shut me up if I go on too long. First of all, Randy Alcorn's book on heaven. Everybody needs to read it. We're going to spend about this much on this time on this planet and about this much in eternity. And I find most people don't know much about what they're going to do in this time. Randy's book, it's not a short read, is a great treatise on this subject. Second thing I'd comment on, repeat what you said earlier, Lloyd. Clarify, all of us, clarify and re-clarify our calling. How has God gifted us? How's he given us passion? And what does the world need? And when those three things come together, that's the sweet spot. I heard Paul say it when he went through his stuff, and then a big smile came over his face. That's the right thing to do. So let me conclude with three suggestions. One, be great at what you do. Make God proud. Two, love and serve people in concrete ways during these days. And number three, be extra bold for the Lord. People are open and will become more open as these weeks go by.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks so much. Please say hi to Leslie, and be sure to share my gerbil comment with her. So get a check out.
I'm elderly. I'll share them both.
Well, thank you guys for all your time. There's a lot of comments there in the chat, but I think several of them say it the best. What a blessing to be here. Thank you so much. Fantastic session. Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Great summary, Bob. Ladies and gentlemen, this was just great. I really appreciate your time, and what fun. And we'll do this again next month. For those of you that have spent this hour with us, we thank you for taking so much time with you. Apparently, I have a technical issue on my mic. We'll get that resolved next time. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the next halftime webinar. So tonight, we thank everybody for joining. God bless.
God bless.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.